Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world that worships the mirror, a world obsessed with images, likes, comparisons, and illusions. From the moment we wake, we are invited, no, seduced into measuring ourselves against others, their success, their beauty, their path, and in doing so we slowly forget the very essence of who we are. But let me tell you something quite peculiar: there is no one to compare yourself to. Not truly, because no one else has your soul, your breath, your being. You are not here to imitate, but to become. And the moment you turn your gaze inward, you begin to see a sacred truth. You are not a copy. You are an original, forged from the fires of the cosmos, shaped by time and mystery. To focus on yourself is not selfish. It is the beginning of liberation. For in your depths lies the silence of the mountains, the calm of the sea, the fire of the stars. And when you finally return home to yourself, you will realize you were never lost. You were only looking in the wrong direction. Let us now take a walk, not toward the world, but toward the soul. The illusion of comparison is one of the most pervasive and subtle traps of the human mind. From a young age, we are conditioned to look sideways, to measure our worth by someone else's success, to gauge our beauty through the eyes of another, to assess our progress by the pace of others' paths. But the very act of comparison presumes a lie, that we are all meant to arrive at the same destination, in the same manner, at the same time. You see, comparison is the language of the ego. It thrives on division, on hierarchy, on the notion that someone must be ahead and someone must be behind. But life is not a race, nor is it a ladder to climb. It is a vast unfolding, an eternal dance where each of us plays a rhythm only we were born to express. To compare yourself to another is like a tree comparing itself to a river, different forms, different functions, different destinies, and yet both are sacred. The moment we step into comparison, we step out of presence. We stop listening to the voice within and begin echoing the noise without. We trade authenticity for approval, truth for applause. And what's worse, we become blind to our own gifts, our own timing, our own essence. It's like staring at the sun and complaining that it's not the moon, failing to realize that both hold their own power, but in different ways, in different hours. We suffer not because we are lacking, but because we are looking in the wrong direction. The more you stare at someone else's garden, the more you forget to water your own. And so your soul begins to wither, not because it is flawed, but because it has been neglected. What if we stopped asking, "Am I doing better than them?" and started asking, "Am I becoming more of who I truly am?" What if success wasn't about being ahead of someone else, but about being in alignment with your own nature? The oak tree does not envy the pine, the sky does not resent the earth. They coexist in harmony because they do not question their role in the great tapestry of being. To move beyond comparison is to awaken to a more subtle, more profound kind of freedom. It is to realize that your life is not a performance, it is a pilgrimage. And your journey cannot be compared, because it is sacred in its solitude. The world does not need another imitation. It needs your essence, raw and unfiltered. So let go of the illusion, lay it down gently. You are not here to be better than anyone else. You are here to be wholly yourself. And that, my friend, is more than enough. It is everything. There is something deeply beautiful and often overlooked about the uniqueness of your inner world. What you feel, what you think, how you see the world, these things are not mistakes or random byproducts of biology. They are sacred. You are not a machine made from parts. You are a field of consciousness, unfolding in your own time, with your own rhythm. And yet, when we focus too much on others, we begin to doubt the very thing that makes us whole, our subjectivity. Modern life encourages us to become spectators in our own experience. We scroll through the curated lives of others, watching their stories unfold, often forgetting that we are meant to be the author of our own. In that constant gaze outward, something precious begins to fade, the awareness that our own story is worth telling, worth feeling, worth living fully. The sacredness of subjectivity lies in the truth that no one else can feel your experience, dream your dreams, or walk your path. And that's not a limitation, it's a liberation. When you attempt to walk someone else's path, you rob yourself of the opportunity to discover the deep intelligence that already lives within you. There is an inner compass, call it intuition, spirit, soul, that gently nudges you toward your truth. But that compass only speaks when the noise of the world dies down, when we are constantly entangled in the lives, opinions, and judgments of others. We drown out that inner voice. We replace the music of the soul with the static of comparison, and in doing so, lose the art of truly being alive. You are a singular note in the great symphony of existence, and your note is not meant to mimic another's. It is meant to sound purely, clearly, and freely. The sacredness of your subjectivity is not in being right or perfect. It is in being honest with yourself, in honoring your own perspective, and in realizing that your lens is not inferior. It is simply different, and that difference is divine. No one else can breathe with your lungs. No one else can dream with your heart. The pain you've carried, the wisdom you've gathered, the love you've shared, all of it has created a lens that no one else possesses. That is your gift, not your weakness. The moment you begin to honor that sacred inner space, you stop chasing after borrowed meaning. You start to discover what life is asking you to become. So don't be ashamed of your pace, your process, or your path. The caterpillar does not apologize for not being a butterfly. It simply becomes one in its own time. In the same way, you are not here to follow a blueprint. You are here to awaken to your own architecture, to feel your own truth, and to embody your own light. In a world that constantly tries to make you someone else, focusing on your subjectivity is not an escape. It is the only way to come home. Seeking external validation is like chasing a mirage in the desert. It appears real, shimmering with the promise of fulfillment, but every step toward it only reveals more emptiness. We are conditioned to believe that the opinions of others define our value, that if enough people approve of us, applaud us, or agree with us, then somehow we will be whole. But this is a deep misunderstanding of where true peace arises. Validation from the outside may feel good momentarily, but it is always fleeting. Like smoke, it slips through the fingers and disappears the moment you try to hold on to it. There is a deeper truth, often hidden beneath the noise of applause. You do not need to be seen by others to be real. You do not need to be praised to be worthy. Your existence is not dependent on recognition, because you are not a product to be consumed. You are a being vast, radiant, and whole. To measure your value by external approval is to forget that you were already complete the moment you took your first breath. The problem with external validation is that it becomes addictive. The more you receive, the more you crave, and the more you fear losing it. You become trapped in a cycle of performance, always wondering how to be liked, accepted, admired. But in trying to be what others want, you lose the shape of your own soul. You start living from the outside in rather than from the inside out. You become a mirror, always reflecting others but never seeing yourself. And here's the paradox: the more you seek validation, the further you drift from authenticity, and people can feel it. Something begins to feel hollow because the world doesn't respond to masks, it responds to presence. To be truly alive is not to be impressive, it is to be real, and realness comes from alignment, not applause. There is a silent revolution that happens when you stop seeking approval. You begin to ask a more honest question, not do they like me, but do I like who I am becoming? That question leads to depth. It leads to clarity, it leads to freedom, for when your sense of worth arises from within, you become unshakable. You no longer bend with every gust of opinion, you stand like a mountain, firm, grounded, and true. To stop chasing validation does not mean you reject connection. On the contrary, it means you begin to connect in a more sacred way, no longer from need, but from fullness. No longer seeking to be filled, but offering who you already are. So let the applause fade, let the noise die down. Return to the quiet space within you where no one is watching, and ask yourself, who am I when no one else is looking? In that silence, you will find the only validation that ever truly mattered. The kind that comes from your own soul saying, yes, this is who I am. To focus on yourself is not an act of ego, but an act of presence. It is the choice to come home to the only place where life is actually happening, here, now, within. The modern world constantly pulls our attention outward toward the past that haunts us, toward a future that anxiously eludes us, toward the lives of others that seem shinier, more successful, more complete. In this endless distraction, we become strangers to ourselves. We forget that the depth we are searching for is not found in someone else's journey, but in the very stillness of our own. Presence is not just about mindfulness in the sense of being aware. It is about returning to what is real. And the only thing that is ever truly real is this moment. The breath you are taking, the sensations in your body, the emotions rising and falling like waves. This is where transformation begins, not in theories, not in borrowed philosophies, but in the radical honesty of being with yourself as you are, without judgment or escape. When you focus on yourself, you begin to notice things that were once hidden beneath the noise. You see how your thoughts loop, how your emotions speak, how your body stores memory and truth. You start to reclaim pieces of yourself that were once ignored or denied. This is not narcissism, it is self-awareness. And without self-awareness, there is no freedom. For how can you change a life you are not truly present in? The world has confused self-focus with selfishness. But selfishness is not about paying attention to yourself. It's about neglecting the impact of your actions on others. Real self-focus, on the other hand, is the foundation for compassion, because when you truly know your own suffering, your own joy, your own longing, you begin to see it in others too. You stop judging and start understanding. You stop performing and start connecting. Presence also brings clarity. The more you turn inward, the more you begin to hear the quiet guidance of your intuition, the subtle nudges that tell you when something feels right or wrong, aligned or off course. This guidance doesn't shout. It whispers, and you can only hear it when you've made space for it, when you've stopped filling your mind with the noise of comparison and the weight of other people's expectations. Focusing on yourself means you no longer chase life, but allow it. You begin to trust that who you are is enough, right now. Not in some distant future where everything is perfect, but here, in the beautiful imperfection of this moment. And from that space, everything begins to shift, not because you force it, but because you finally align with the natural flow of your being. So return, not to the world's demands or distractions, but to yourself. Be where your feet are, be in your breath. Be in your truth. That is where your power lives, not in trying to be somewhere else, but in fully inhabiting where you already are. We live in a culture obsessed with improvement. Everywhere you look, there is a message urging you to be better, faster, stronger, more successful. It whispers that who you are now is not quite enough, that happiness, peace, and worthiness lie just beyond the next achievement. But this pursuit of becoming better often conceals a more dangerous idea, that you are somehow broken, incomplete, or lacking, and so you spend your life fixing what was never truly wrong, chasing a version of yourself that is always just out of reach. But what if the goal is not to be better, but to become whole? To stop fragmenting yourself into acceptable and unacceptable pieces, and instead embrace all of you. The light and the shadow, the clarity and the confusion, the strength and the softness. You are not here to compete with others or even with your past self. You are here to remember the truth of your being, that you are already complete, already sacred, already enough. Wholeness is not about perfection. It is about integration. It means welcoming the parts of you that feel messy, uncertain, or unlovable, and allowing them to exist without shame. When you focus only on self-improvement, you create a war within, one part of you constantly trying to fix or overcome another. But when you focus on becoming whole, that war ends. You begin to listen instead of fight. You begin to soften instead of strive. You see, you are not a project to be completed. You are a mystery to be lived. The soul does not operate on timelines or to-do lists. It speaks in silence, symbols, and sensations, and it asks not for perfection, but for presence. The question is not, how can I become better? But can I be with myself as I am, right now, without resistance? That is the doorway to transformation, not force, but acceptance. In becoming whole, you stop chasing an image and start living from your essence. You begin to realize that nothing outside of you, no amount of approval, success, or validation, can offer the peace that comes from within. Peace is not found in finishing the race. It is found in realizing you were never in a race to begin with. And when you embrace your wholeness, something remarkable happens. You become more gentle with others. You stop demanding perfection from them, just as you've stopped demanding it from yourself. You begin to move through life not as someone trying to win, but as someone trying to love. And that changes everything, so let go of the idea that you must be more. You are not a work in progress. You are a living, breathing masterpiece in motion. Not because you have it all figured out, but because you are courageously showing up exactly as you are. You are not here to prove yourself. You are here to be yourself, and that is more than enough. That is wholeness. That is freedom. You see, most people spend their lives looking outward, comparing, competing, and constantly measuring themselves against others. But this is the great illusion. The self is not something you find out there. It's something you come home to. When you begin to truly focus on yourself, not in a vain or selfish way, but in a conscious, aware way, you stop being a fragment scattered in the winds of opinion and become whole again. You realize rather beautifully that peace was never in the applause. But in your own stillness, you see, most people spend their lives looking outward, comparing, competing, and constantly measuring themselves against others. But this is the great illusion. The self is not something you find out there. It's something you come home to. When you begin to truly focus on yourself, not in a vain or selfish way, but in a conscious, aware way, you stop being a fragment scattered in the winds of opinion and become whole again. You realize rather beautifully that peace was never in the applause. But in your own stillness, we've been conditioned to believe that life is a race and that others are our competition, that someone else's success somehow takes away from our own, that if someone moves ahead, we've fallen behind. But this is a game invented by the mind, not by life itself. The tree does not compare itself to the tree beside it. It simply grows. The sun does not ask why another star shines more brightly. It simply burns. The moment you drop this idea of comparison, the moment you stop measuring your worth by someone else's story, you begin to live. Focusing on yourself is not about building a wall around you. It's about understanding what truly moves you, what truly matters, and what your soul is quietly whispering beneath the noise. The world tells you to chase attention, chase likes, chase validation. But what you chase, you do not have. And if your sense of worth is built on something outside of you, then your peace will forever be at the mercy of things you cannot control. But when you bring that attention inward, when you start listening, really listening to yourself, you find a well that does not run dry. So much of what we think is love or success or meaning is simply mimicry. We see what others do, what others have, and we think that must be the path. But that's not your path, it's theirs. And trying to live someone else's truth is the fastest way to betray your own. The moment you realize that you are not here to fulfill a role or win a race, but to simply express yourself as honestly and fully as you can, that is the moment your real life begins. Now here's the paradox. By focusing on yourself, you actually become more connected to everything else. Because you're no longer reacting out of insecurity or fear or a need to prove something, you begin to act from presence, from clarity, from alignment. And when you're in alignment with yourself, you don't need to force connection. It happens naturally, like a flower blooming simply because it's time, and here lies the beauty of it all. You are not becoming anything. You're not on your way to some finished product. You are already what you've been trying to become. The acorn does not strive to become an oak. It unfolds according to its nature. So too must you stop striving and start unfolding. Your role is not to chase perfection or status or comparison. It is to become deeply, intimately aware of what you already are. When you truly focus on yourself, you stop living in reaction to the world. You begin to respond with grace. You stop grasping for control, and you start trusting in the flow of life. You realize that what you were looking for out there was only ever a reflection of what was waiting inside you all along. So sit with yourself, listen. Watch the thoughts come and go like clouds passing through a vast sky. Let go of the need to be seen and start seeing yourself. Because in the end, the most powerful thing you can offer this world is not a version of yourself that pleases others, but a version of yourself that is fully, unapologetically you. And that begins the moment you focus only on yourself. We live under the constant illusion that there is such a thing as the other, that someone out there is separate from us, different, foreign, an opponent or a model to follow. But this is the trick of perception. You see someone succeeding and feel less. You see someone struggling and feel more. Yet these feelings are reflections of the thoughts you've assigned to them, not truths of their being. The truth is, what you recognize in others, whether admiration or judgment, is often a direct mirror of what lies unresolved or unnoticed within yourself. It's an extraordinary thing to realize that when you look out at the world, you're not actually seeing the world as it is. You're seeing the world as you are. Your judgments are the echoes of your inner dialogue. Your praise of another's strength is a recognition of something dormant within you. Your envy is not a sign of their superiority, but a spotlight on a part of yourself that you've neglected. And so, to focus on yourself is not to turn away from others, but to finally see them clearly, without the distortion of your own projections. We spend so much time trying to fix others, to save them, to critique them, but rarely do we pause and ask why we're drawn to those impulses. Often, we are uncomfortable with someone else's behavior because it reminds us of something we've suppressed within ourselves. We want to change them because we cannot yet accept that part of ourselves. The need to control, correct, or compare is born out of fear, not wisdom. And the only way to transcend that fear is not through manipulation of others, but through deep, sincere self-awareness. Now, this doesn't mean that other people aren't real. Of course they are, but the version of them that causes you pain or jealousy or judgment, that version lives in your mind. They are a character in your internal drama. And in that drama you play the role of someone who must measure up, win approval, avoid shame. But this is just a play, a performance. You've been cast in a story you never chose, and the beauty is, you can walk off that stage at any time, the moment you stop asking, what do they think of me? And begin asking, what do I think of me? Everything changes. Because suddenly you're no longer a reflection of others' moods or opinions. You become rooted, grounded, whole. You begin to realize that the world isn't your judge or your savior, it's your mirror. And in that mirror, you're not meant to perfect the reflection. You're meant to recognize yourself. Focusing on yourself means dropping the endless noise about who's ahead, who's behind, who's better, who's worse. All of that chatter exists only in the realm of ego, and ego is like fog it clouds the clarity of what already is. When you focus inward, the fog begins to lift. You see that you don't need to win anything. You don't need to prove anything. You only need to be awake to what you are, and what you are is not lacking. What you are is not broken. You may feel pain, confusion, doubt, but beneath that, like the still surface of a lake beneath the ripples, there is peace. There is enoughness, but you'll never find it while your gaze is fixed outward, chasing or fleeing the shadows of others. You'll only find it by sitting quietly within yourself, by meeting every part of you with honesty, and by recognizing that every other was just a part of you all along. In this way, focusing on yourself is not an escape from the world. It is the doorway to understanding it, and through that doorway you don't just meet yourself, you meet everything. We've been told, time and time again, that focusing on ourselves is selfish. That we should always be thinking of others, giving, sacrificing, adjusting. And while compassion and generosity are noble, they lose their power when they come from a place of emptiness. You cannot give water from an empty well. You cannot offer light when your own flame has gone out. What we call selfishness, more often than not, is simply self-awareness in a world that's forgotten how to be still. Focusing on yourself is not about building a fortress or closing your heart to others. It's about finally becoming honest about your inner world. It's about observing the thoughts that stir you, the emotions that rise without warning, the patterns you repeat without knowing why. It's not a retreat, it's a return. A return to the one place that has always been home, the one place that holds every answer you've been chasing within. Most people move through life reacting rather than responding. Their energy is dictated by the moods and expectations of others. If someone disapproves of them, they shrink. If someone praises them, they expand, and so they become like weather vanes, turning whichever way the wind blows. But when you begin to focus inward, when you become deeply familiar with your own inner space, you realize that you are not the weather. You are the sky, the storms, the clouds, the bright sun. They all pass through you, but none of them are you. Self-focus in its truest form is not self-absorption. It is sacred observation. It is the simple act of being with yourself without trying to fix, improve, or escape. Just watching, just listening, and from this listening a kind of clarity arises. You begin to see what is true and what is borrowed. You begin to understand that many of your desires were planted there by someone else, parents, teachers, culture. And with that clarity comes freedom, the freedom to choose your life not as a reaction but as a conscious creation. When you turn your gaze inward, you may at first feel discomfort. Old wounds rise. Forgotten grief surfaces. Parts of you you've hidden come into view. But this is not a punishment. It's a purification. Like cleaning out a long neglected room, the dust must rise before the space feels light again. So don't rush this process. Sit with it. Allow the mess. Because only in allowing it can you begin to understand it, and only in understanding it can you truly transform. And here's the deeper truth. When you focus on yourself in this way, you become more capable of true connection. Because you're no longer looking to others to fill your gaps. You're no longer loving from lack, giving from guilt, or helping from a hidden need to be needed. You are whole, and from your wholeness, everything you give becomes pure. It's not forced, it flows. You don't need to announce your journey to anyone. You don't need to justify your boundaries or explain your solitude. There is a quiet power in tending to your own soul, in walking away from the noise and choosing stillness, in building a life that is rooted in your own rhythm, not someone else's tempo. And though the world may not always understand it, your peace does not require their permission. So yes, focus on yourself, not as an act of separation, but as an act of alignment, not to exclude others, but to include your true self in everything you do, because when you finally sit with yourself, not your roles, not your image, but your real self, you don't just find peace. You become it, and from that stillness the world around you begins to reflect something beautiful back. Presence, clarity, truth. We spend so much of our lives chasing things outside ourselves, recognition, applause, attention, and approval. We're told that these are signs of success, of worth, of having finally made it. But have you ever noticed how fleeting those moments are? You receive the compliment, the praise, the promotion, and for a moment it feels good. But then it fades, and you're left hungry again, chasing the next moment, the next hand clap, the next nod from the crowd. It's a cycle that never ends, because external validation is like trying to quench your thirst with salt water. It only makes you thirstier. The truth is, you don't need the world to approve of you. What you really crave isn't applause, it's alignment. You want to feel at home in your own skin. You want to trust your own voice, and that can never come from the outside. It must be grown from within, slowly, patiently, like a seed turning toward the sun. External praise can be pleasant, but if it's your source of worth, you're always at risk of losing yourself the moment it disappears. We live in a world that rewards performance. We learn to wear masks, to play roles, to fit into boxes that were never made for us. We become skilled at pleasing, pretending, perfecting, and yet beneath all that effort is a quiet longing, not to be celebrated, but simply to be seen. To be understood not for what we do, but for who we are when we stop trying. But how can anyone see the real you, if you've hidden it even from yourself? When you focus on yourself, truly focus, you begin to pull back those masks. Not with shame, but with curiosity. You begin to ask the hard questions. Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I without the roles, the titles, the performance? And in that quiet exploration you may find something startling, that you were never incomplete. You were simply distracted from your own fullness. External validation is a fragile foundation. One day they love you, the next they forget you. One day you're admired, the next you're misunderstood. If your self-worth is built on being liked, then you'll always fear being disliked. If it's built on being seen, you'll always fear being ignored. But when your worth is rooted in knowing yourself, in being true to your own rhythm, you become untouchable in the best possible way. Not invincible, not indifferent, but stable, like a tree rooted deep into the earth, unmoved by passing winds. This doesn't mean you reject appreciation or love from others, of course not. It simply means you don't depend on it to feel whole. You welcome it, you're grateful for it, but your foundation remains steady even when it's absent. That is freedom. That is peace. We often look outward for proof that we're enough. But the paradox is, the more you look out there, the more you lose touch with what's in here. You don't need to be validated to be real. You don't need to be praised to be worthy. The quiet confidence that comes from self-knowledge is more powerful than any round of applause, because it cannot be taken away. It doesn't require permission. It doesn't waver when the lights go out. So stop chasing the echo of applause and start listening to your own voice. The world's approval is a shifting tide, but your own awareness is an anchor. Focus on that, cultivate that, because when you truly see yourself, love yourself, and trust yourself, no amount of silence from the outside can make you feel unseen. You become the source, and from that source everything flows. We are so often told to strive, to hustle, to become something greater than we are. The world encourages us to build, improve, climb, to always be in motion. And yet in all this becoming we rarely stop to ask, what if I'm not meant to become, but to remember? What if the truth of who I am is not something I need to construct, but something I need to uncover? You see, you are not a project. You are not raw material waiting to be molded into someone better. You are already the essence, already the being, already the soul, whole, complete, and profound. But life, in its complexity, layers us with expectations, with labels, with fears. We start to believe that we are broken, incomplete, in need of fixing. We think we have to reach some distant point in the future where finally we'll be worthy. And so we race forward, desperate to arrive, not realizing that everything we're chasing is already here, hidden under the noise of striving. You don't need to become yourself. You are yourself. The journey is not about building. It's about peeling away what was never truly you. When you focus on yourself, not in the egoic sense, but in the sacred sense, you begin to see that you've been enough all along. You begin to realize that growth isn't about adding more, but letting go of roles, of stories, of identities that no longer serve you. It's not a race toward perfection, it's a return to authenticity. And in that return there is peace, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer at war with what is. So much of our suffering comes from resisting our present experience. We think, once I fix this, once I improve that, once I achieve this goal, then I'll be happy. But this keeps joy always just out of reach. And yet, the irony is that when you stop striving to become and start being, happiness arises naturally. Not because life becomes easier, but because you stop arguing with it. You start flowing with it. Like a river that doesn't ask to be deeper or wider, it simply moves. Effortless, grounded, alive. You've been taught that the answers are outside of you, that someone else knows better, that the world holds the key. But you are the key. The guidance you seek is not hidden in a book, a title, a job, or a person. It's been within you all along, but it speaks softly. It does not shout over the noise of the world, and unless you turn inward, unless you get quiet enough to listen, you may miss its wisdom entirely. This is why focusing on yourself is not indulgence, it's initiation. It's the doorway to every genuine connection you'll ever have, because when you stop trying to be something else, you give others permission to do the same. You stop performing, and in that space truth can enter, real intimacy can begin, real freedom can take root, and it all starts with the most courageous act you'll ever make, to be fully, unapologetically yourself. So remember this, not as a motivation to strive harder, but as a reason to slow down. You are not becoming anything, you are unveiling, you are not chasing your soul, you are listening to it. And the more you listen, the clearer it becomes. Everything you thought you needed to add was already within you, waiting patiently to be seen. Focus only on yourself, not because the world doesn't matter, but because you can only meet the world as deeply as you've met yourself. And when you finally arrive in your own presence, when you sit with the stillness that is already whole, you'll know, this is it, this is who I've been all along.